Today's miniature is from Asgard Rising. In today's video, you'll see that my painting process is so whacked. I painted with oils, acrylics, and then oils to finish this Asgard Rising miniature. Hi, I'm Don. Welcome to my studio. This channel is supported by all these awesome brands. Also, this channel won't be possible without the support of my patrons. I did the zenithal underpainting with cuttlefish colors via the airbrush. So if you want the full tutorial version of this video, do consider being a patron. The Patreon videos are way longer, of course, and they do have commentary of their own wherein I share my thought process and of course the whole painting process of a particular miniature. Anyways, in this YouTube video, we're kinda like I'm sharing my thoughts on oil painting in general, oil painting miniatures. If you are in the fence of adding oil paints to your painting process, may it be miniatures or fine scale or even gunpla, I think I could share like tips in terms of them being worth it. To be honest, with miniature painting, using oil paints to paint your miniatures are not worth it. I'm not kidding. Using oil paints to paint miniatures, even if you use the fast matte from Gamblin and you use mineral spirit so that the oil paints dry a bit faster, they're totally not worth it only if you're just painting one miniature. The slower drying time is great for wet blending, for blending, and like painting over. If you dry brush oil paints, for example, it doesn't look like dry brush because the paints are smooth if you like rub it or dry brush it along the surface of the model. So they're great for really fast coverage of bigger surfaces. And as long as you do not layer on top of the previous painting while it's still wet, it's super worth it because you get to do like quick blends with oil paints. However, the usual layering process that we do with acrylics, you cannot do like as easy with oil paints, especially if you paint like thick oil paints. And you have to really wait for it to dry a bit more before you could add another layer on top. Because if not, you'll be rubbing off the previous layers. This slower drying time is sort of a hassle, again as I've said, if you're just painting one miniature. But if you're painting a bigger miniature like 4 inches or bigger, or a bigger figure, it's kind of worth it, I think, because as you paint a certain area of the model, by the time you're finished with another area and you go back to like the previous area, it should be dry by then. Also, with this particular miniature, I actually painted like 4 or even 5 minis while I was painting the skin. So, you might get confused because I painted the base color of the skin and then eventually I painted some shades with red Indian and then painted some highlights. But because I'm painting like a batch of miniatures, by the time I go back to the first miniature that I was painting, the first layer is already dried. I'm not kidding when I said earlier that oil painting miniatures or using oil paints for painting miniatures is not worth it. Using oil paints to paint miniatures, in my opinion, is only worth it if you're painting a huge model, like a really big printed, 3D printed miniature more than like 6 inches tall, or you are painting a batch of miniatures or doing army painting, or basically you just want to relax. The easiest way to incorporate oil painting with the painting of minis is that, other than doing a batch painting or army painting, you could see in this video that you should paint all of the base colors with acrylics, and then once those acrylics are dry, which they dry really fast, then you could proceed to painting shades and then adding highlights with oil paints. Of course, you could use the usual contrast paints or even inks to add shade to your model, or do like the usual layering, which is super fun, relaxing, however very time consuming. With oils, if you apply a small amount on a certain area of the model and then you spread it out with a clean brush, you have a very quick and very fast blending or shading of the model. Although these quick shades are like achievable with acrylics, it's so much easier and much more relaxing with oils because you feel that what you're doing or applying is not that permanent and you could easily wipe it off, especially if you're doing washes or applying shades over a satin or gloss finish. Also, oil washes or oil glazes should dry fast or faster because you thin them down with mineral spirit. Now for highlighting with oil paints, it's only efficient and worth it if you use what I use. Basically, I'm using Winsor & Newton underpainting white, which dries super fast. Like it will dry in like 15 or 20 minutes. And it's super nice because it doesn't you don't really have to revive it on your glass palette every time you're painting highlights, because when you're highlighting with acrylics, the problem is that it's so difficult to keep the consistency of the paint that is perfect for highlighting. Now at this point of the painting of this Asgard Rising mini, I'm kinda in the flip-flop stage wherein I add shades to tone down highlights and then add a bit more highlights to make certain areas pop a bit more, especially the non-metallic metal, and then I go back to adding a small amount of shades in certain areas, again to improve the contrast and volume of the mini. But this takes like an hour or maybe 2 if you want, but with oils it's faster because it's easy to blend. This one, we're finishing the model with Van Dyke Brown, which is a very dark brown color, and it's perfect for Lisa's painting. Now it's time to thank all my awesome patrons. I have a little more than 100 patrons and they fuel me to produce more videos here at YouTube and of course at Patreon. Lastly, a ton of thanks to Asgard Rising for sponsoring this mini. This miniature is actually my first 54mm sized mini. Asgard Rising sent me this model and I had it printed at this scale. It was fun but kinda weird at the same time because I'm not used to painting this scale. Anyways, in terms of the painting process in this video, it's kinda whacked. It's not linear, it's so inefficient looking, but since I painted like a batch of minis while I was painting the skin, it was actually very efficient. And after painting the skin, letting it dry and painting other models before going back to this painting, it was like super dry at that time and the oil paints are cured, so I just applied or painted the base colors and then really quickly added blends and shades to the model and a bit of highlights, and then it's finished. So basically the whole painting of the model is maybe less than 4 hours, so it's super fast. Although I would suggest and recommend when you paint with oil paints, you paint a batch of minis because it's not worth it if you're just painting one mini because of the waiting time when you're painting in layers. I hope you like this video. That's it, Pansit.